Hello and welcome to Unlocking the Benefits of SAP on AWS, a complete migration guide. Today's webinar is sponsored by Proterra and AWS and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is Scott Becker. I'm from Actual Tech, and I'm excited to be your moderator for this discussion panel. Now, before we get to today's great content, we do have a few housekeeping items that are going to help you get the most out of this session. First off, we want this to be an informative event for you, so we encourage any questions in the questions box in your webinar control panel. So not only will we have team members responding to questions during the live event, but we'll also have just that opportunity to ask questions there, and if there are any questions that we don't get to during the event, we're also going to pass them along to the teams afterward for follow-up. So be sure to put any questions that you have in there. The Q&A panel is also the place to let us know about any technical issues that you might be experiencing. A browser refresh will fix most audio, video, or slide advancement issues. But if that doesn't work, just let us know in the Q&A and we'll provide further technical assistance. Now, second, in the handout section of your webinar control panel, you'll find that we're offering several resources. I'd especially like to call your attention to a PDF that's about 6 steps to a flawless migration to AWS. Lots of great information in there. Be sure to download that. There are also some links in there labeled ATM, which stands for Actual Tech Media. One of those is the ATM Decisions Group. That's a panel of IT decision makers that you can apply to join to participate in some more in-depth conversations and other opportunities. Also, there's a link to the ATM Event Center, which has our calendar of more upcoming events like this one. So I encourage you to access all those resources now and feel free to share them with your friends and colleagues. Now, third, at the end of this webinar event, we will be awarding a $250 Amazon gift card to one lucky registrant. Of course, you must be in attendance during the live event to qualify for the prize. Official terms and conditions of today's prize drawing can be found also in your handout section. Just scroll to the bottom and you'll find the link with the details there. Okay, with that housekeeping out of the way, let's get to today's fantastic session. It is really my pleasure to introduce you to our presenters today. We have Eric McDonald, who's Vice President of Cloud Transformation at Proterra. And we have Nick Miletich, who's Chief Operating Officer at Proterra. And then running the conversation for us today is Archana Kuppaswamy, who's a Senior Partner Solutions Architect for Amazon Web Services. I'm going to turn things over to Archana to get us started.
Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. This is Archana Kuppaswamy. I'm a Senior Partner Solutions Architect and SAP Specialist with AWS. Very excited to be with you all today. So in this session today, we're going to cover the benefits of running SAP workload on AWS. And together with the Proterra team here, we're going to focus on the top 10 considerations for migrating your SAP environment to AWS. So with that having said, I would like to introduce Nick and Eric. Nick, could you please introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Hey, everyone. My name is Nick Miletich. I'm COO at Proterra. I'm looking forward to the conversation. I've been in the SAP and cloud hosting industry for a little over 20 years now, focusing migrating and hosting SAP environments in the public cloud, specifically AWS. So looking forward to working with everyone.
Thank you, Nick. Eric, could you please go next?
Hi, everyone. Eric McDonald, Vice President of Cloud Transformation here at Proterra. Been with Proterra just a little going over almost 4 years now. Been in the cloud infrastructure space, going on 15 years. Really looking forward to having a conversation with you guys.
Thank you, Eric. It's awesome. Let's go to the agenda. Just a quick second. All right. So as we see here on the slide, we are going to cover all the top 10 considerations while migrating your SAP environment to AWS, so starting from all the way from assessment and planning through migration and post-migration and optimization. So we're going to have a quick, wonderful chat about it. So let's get started. The topic one we have here, the first consideration is assessment and planning. So just want to give a little bit of perspective before I kickstart. AWS has proven models for SAP migration and modernization centered around 3 key areas: assess, mobilize, migrate, and modernize. And specifically for the assess phase, we with partners engage with customers, do AWS SAP discovery workshops where we learn customers the priority outcomes that we need to achieve, the challenges that they are facing, and come up with a detailed plan like on architectures, the migration options, and various different things to start with. And then we also do an initial high-level total cost of ownership assessment to assess all the benefits, potential benefits of migrating and modernizing your SAP systems on AWS. So there's a lot we do, and I would definitely like to get the perspective of Eric and Nick here in terms of what are some of the core assessment tools that Protera focuses on.
Yeah, it's a fantastic topic and one that we could probably talk days on, as you know, Archana. I think when we start these, we'll say these migration journeys with customers, once they've made the choice to go to the specific cloud platform like Amazon Web Services, the real work begins of what I would really say is that detailed analysis of their landscape, their infrastructure, and I would say also by and far large getting buy-in to the move, just because there is, as you know, how important SAP is, it runs the business usually. And what we found is that when you tackle a project like that, really doing what I would consider a very comprehensive discovery, from system metrics, connectivity, dependency analysis is absolutely huge. If you have a bunch of external, connected systems, interfaces, it becomes critical on being very successful there. I think the one thing too, to also to kind of to your point, Archana, is that there is proven programs and models that Amazon has put together to where I won't say it makes it easy, but it makes it a lot more, I'd say normalized on moving such a critical application to the cloud. I think the one thing also I want to kind of at least point out is that the thing that I find, most interesting, or I don't want to say most interesting, but challenging in that early stage is definitely the dependency analysis that you would typically go through. And especially very large customers that if you're on premises and then going to AWS, well, external connectivity is certainly one that we see quite a bit. And I am curious, just from your side, Archana, right, when there has been like the initial planning and assessment phases, have you guys ran into what I would consider, difficult or better ways to identify external connectivity to vendors, partners, etc.?
Exactly, Eric. There is like a lot of different architectural options in terms of connectivity, like that. For example, during this initial phase when we do the discovery workshops, like there are different ways for connectivity. We work with the customers. We identify, for example, if they need to go with direct connect or just like site-to-site VPN or all the various best practices that they should actually follow based on the requirements what we want to achieve. So there's like detailed documentations that's available, and there are like SAs, like SAP specialists who have experience and migrating and modernizing, who can guide the customers to sort out all of those networking related questions. And we see various different kind of these questions, and we love to address those.
Yeah,
Thank
we
you.
certainly usually call that out early on, what we consider in
Yeah.
the risk assessment phase, right? So when you're going through, all the AWS programs, the risk assessment, we typically would spend a lot of time on the bottlenecks there, specifically if there was network limitations or a lot of external connectivity where it required a lot of planning or whitelisting for vendors or other connections that had to be whitelisted inbounds. Nick, I'd love to hear just from you, just, on some of your experience that you've had deep in the space, especially on RISE too, on just, maybe some of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. This phase with assessment and planning is probably the most critical, especially with RISE. At the beginning of a RISE migration, you're really trying to figure out what is going to RISE and what is not. So if you're on-prem today and you're looking to convert to a cloud-based model, or if you're in the cloud today, but looking to only migrate certain aspects into RISE, that assessment and planning is key, right? You have to understand what your business is doing. You have to understand those interfaces. You have to understand what you're moving to RISE, and then understanding how that's going to extrapolate when you move into a RISE environment. Because in a RISE environment, we know that you only have certain access, right? You only have certain access to the system from a database, from an SAP level, but OS is kind of a no-touch type of platform. And that being said, there's a lot of things you can do right in this assessment and planning to take advantage of both what RISE can offer and what AWS native can offer. Things like file shares, internet access, all of that, even putting your SAP RISE environment next to your on-prem or cloud native environment within the same regions or AZs, that type of planning is critical to get the best performance and bang for your buck out of moving to RISE and using what great features AWS has to support SAP.
Yeah, I think it's important too. And I think, I'd like to hear both of your guys' perspective too. I think, we talk about sometimes where a customer needs to migrate very, very quickly, right? I think that there's talks usually early on that talks about migration approaches, whether you do a big bang or a phased approach, and what I would consider in the field, I think, the phased approach is the tried and true tested methodology of moving what I would say in a very efficient and I would say, safe manner moving to the cloud versus a big bang. Not to say that you couldn't do those, but Archana, I'm just curious, from you, I mean, does that kind of track what you see also with your customers, just in that initial assessment and planning, definitely going through more of a phased approach, going through lower environments and moving your way up to prod?
Exactly, Eric. That is something we see commonly, just like say migrating the initial systems, and then, for example, the DR comes after later. So it's normally the phased approach, kind of like splitting things into different phases. It makes it easy, and that's very common, actually. That's right.
Yeah, and we feel like that's much more palatable as well. You're able to kind of get
Yeah.
these chunks done during that migration phase, and it does help people to be very focused on a specific mission on each one, throughout the project, right? So you have the bigger goal, but
Exactly.
you have your actual, defined migration schedules and ways. So yeah, I think it's is there anything else that you guys like to add? I know there again we can talk all day about these key topics, right? But anything else you guys like to add, specifically on the assessment and planning part of this?
Very good, Eric. Thank you so much. That was awesome, actually. Let's move on to the next topic, like that we have here, the second consideration, cost. As we all know, cost optimization is one very important point, and cost savings is one of the primary motivators for like many of the customers to move to cloud, specifically an AWS cloud. And there are some just quickly want to give an example. Like there are some RTG white papers that says like that about 96% of the customers they've been able to see a reduction in the total cost of ownership and also have an overall average savings of about 26% when they move to cloud. So, and AWS, as we're going to continue to talk on this in detail, like offers various different management tools to monitor your application costs and also to continuously right size your enterprise application in terms of optimization. So with that having said, Eric, just curious, like what are some of the core key optimization strategies that Protera focuses on for SAP workloads in the AWS cloud, and any examples, please?
Yeah, so I think this is one that always gets the most attention. Of course, we want the application is something as important as SAP to run the cloud, but it is making sure that it's running cost efficient as well. And that part of that, just going back really quickly on that whole planning part of that, where you talk about getting the TCO, that sets the stage for everything, right? And I think cost optimization to us is something that we spend an enormous amount of time on. And this also goes back into like a little bit of the assessment and planning phase and doing a good discovery to be able to get key metrics to make sure that, we're not over provisioning or using incorrect storage, specifically on the AWS side where, we don't maybe need as much performance, right? So, I would say just some examples, is, if you're going to be doing a lift and shift, or we're going to build, SAP HANA and we have a bunch of EBS volumes, et cetera, making sure that we're using the right type of EBS volumes, right? As you know, there's different types, right? And, we sometimes will make sure that to coach customers that, hey, look, maybe you don't need the highest level of IOPS consumption, right? Based on the data that we see, this is, the right type of storage. And we always back that into what Amazon has put out there from reference architectural standpoint, always as a starting point, as well as making sure that we're always following best practices, specifically from SAP. As we're always in SAP notes, making sure that we're doing things that are also what I consider valid from an SAP perspective to make sure that what we're deploying and configuring with customers is cost efficient, but also meets all the KPIs. I will say that, Amazon probably better than anyone, I think, does a really good job of, I would say, showing that cost, and then also being able to give flexibility to drive, further discounting down, whether it's RIs or savings plans, very, very flexible. And we've seen a lot of customers, also to your point, Archana, is that, we always typically see a reduction in a customer's, TCO significantly, actually. And we always see as like that's, you have SAP and then you have all these other applications that go along with the fleet that they're able to benefit off of a similar, model as well. Nick, I'd just love to hear kind of your thoughts too, in your years of doing this as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you hit the nail on the head with SAP. You really have to focus on how the system's performing. So you're doing the analysis on the front end on the existing environment and seeing how that translates. But you're also then taking that and overlaying it on AWS best practices and SAP best practices. So there's a lot more to take into consideration when you deploy SAP environments, just from the standpoint that you have to meet best practices for a lot of different vendors in order to be supported on any real cloud platform, including AWS. Now, Rise is an interesting one. Rise, you really have to take care of that cost optimization on the front end, on that assessment and planning. The reason being is SAP really measures the size of your environment based on a measurement they call FUE. And that measurement is a conglomeration of basically a type of system size-wise to a amount of users that are in your environment. So you always want to take that into consideration. They do have pre-canned types of instances that they will deploy for you. There's a little less leniency, but they are vetted, right? You don't have to go through all the process of seeing if they're supported. SAP will do that legwork for you in a RISE environment. And recently, they are allowing you to do some customizing of that too, which is great for the workloads that require a little more or a little less horsepower than maybe what the standard FUE kind of spits out from the calculation. So a lot to take into consideration on cost optimization on that front end.
Yeah, awesome.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Eric. So let's move on to the third one, security and compliance. Again, security is yet another very important pillar. I just want to give a little bit of context. Like as we know, AWS is architected to be the world's most secure cloud computing environment that's available today. AWS is secure enough for, like I say, top secret workloads. We support 143 security standards and compliance certifications. We have been powering SAP HANA NS2 Secure Cloud significantly longer than any other cloud service provider. So there is a lot on this space specifically. I just quickly want to hit on the shared responsibility model specifically from a security perspective. AWS, in terms of the security of the cloud, AWS is responsible. So basically, meaning AWS is responsible for protecting the infrastructure that runs all of the services in the cloud. For example, the infrastructure is composed of, as we know, hardware, software, networking, facilities, everything that runs the AWS cloud service. And in terms of the shared responsibility model, we request it's a responsibility of the customers to secure whatever is in the cloud. So basically, like the cloud services that they are using, the EC2 instances, the configurations, and things like that. So this is another very important topic, and definitely want to get Eric's perspective on the various security services and compliance framework that normally Protera focuses on for the customers with SAP workloads. Eric, please.
Yeah, so I would say, this kind of goes back to, again, where we can talk hours, if not days, specifically on this topic alone. When we work with customers, we spend an enormous amount of time, on these, what we call them core landing zone topics, right? But it's all the core AWS pillars. And one of the core pillars is really, we look at this governance framework, but if you look down a little bit more, the security and compliance part of it is just, super important. And before we even move any workload, right, we've gone through, I would say a very thorough security and audit and compliance review with the business before any workloads move. We've seen sometimes, when we're not working with customers, maybe we get engaged later on where they've skipped some of those crucial steps. And it's either cause for rework or a few other things. But what I will say is that the out of the box tools that Amazon provides is just fantastic in terms of security and compliance. But just kind of going back to that security model, right, where you talked about where Amazon is taking care of a lot of the core backend, right, but it is still on the customer or partners to make sure that it's configured in a way where it is secure, right? So you're not just accidentally opening up security groups to the world. You aren't incorrectly exposing S3 buckets, right? And with those, Amazon's done a really good job also of alerting you when there is misconfiguration, right? That's, I think, the thing that I appreciate the most is that while it is the customer's responsibility or partners, but they also have tools to alert you when there is potential misconfiguration. Guard duties, amazing. We're big users of that. Same thing with Security Hub as well. And we've seen, I think, Archer, you can talk about this too, right? There's been a huge investment from Amazon just in the firewall space too. What I would consider that, where Amazon's really stepped up and been kind of an industry leader on the next generation firewalls as well. But yeah,
Exactly.
security and compliance is it's super important for us, and making sure that you got the right topology, the landing zone model set up, the way that you have traffic flow ingressing and egressing out of your environment, how north, south, east, west traffic works, the type of isolation that you're going to have, and a multi-account structure, which is typically a best practice that we see, is crucial for any type of what I would say long-term successful cloud deployment, and then managing it long-term to also stay compliant with the business. I think from like an industry standard perspective, yeah, the one thing I will call out too that I thought was really unique with Amazon is that they'll give you kind of audit readiness checks in terms of like HIPAA, SOC 2, those types of things with Artifact, which is awesome, right? Um, I think that's really some of the key things from my side that I generally get super excited working in this space with Amazon and customers on that. Nick, if you have anything else to add there.
Yeah, I would piggyback on that and say, from a cloud native standpoint, I think everything you said was spot on. From a Rise standpoint, once you move into Rise, if you're looking to go into that platform, a lot of that is handled on the back end by SAP. So a lot of that would be covered through their not only their audit, but all of their tools that they use. So it really is a plug and play right into AWS from the Rise environment into your cloud native. So it's really taken care of for you.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Eric. And just to chime in a little bit, and Eric, you were spot on actually. There are like numerous AWS services that are available just from security perspective and from compliance perspective, and various different like best practices and network related, like making sure everything is clean. Like there are like detailed documentations and guidances and best practices available too. So that's an excellent discussion. So we'll move on to the next topic here. The next important consideration is performance and scalability. Again, this is another important pillar, especially for SAP workloads, the scalability and performance. Just to give a little bit of background, and in terms of for example, with the AWS Nitro systems, we all know it practically delivers all of the compute and the memory capabilities to the host hardware. The hypervisor portion of it is completely offloaded, resulting in better overall performance. And AWS is always well architected for high performance. And just on the HANA cloud, like the Graviton space, SAP chooses like AWS Graviton-based Amazon EC2 instances to run their SAP HANA cloud environment. And there are some pointers like they have been able to see a significant 30% better compute performance for its analytical workload. So those are some of the things. Eric, just on this, what are some of the common things that you see from customers and common architecture requests and architectural scalability questions and concerns?
Yeah. So one thing that we see quite a bit actually is that we'll get asked, and this kind of goes back to my point about making sure that everything that we're doing on Amazon is, using the Amazon, we'll call it reference architecture, but also making sure that we're using SAP notes too. As you know, Amazon is always coming out with brand new, instance family types. There's new innovation that I feel like happens daily sometimes with Amazon, with new features being launched. But I will say that this kind of goes back down to making sure that we're picking a cost efficient and then a performance efficient for the customer. I will say, this is, given like once we've migrated or planning a migrated customer, just from a performance perspective, making sure I'll just use, HANA as an example, right? Making sure that we're selecting the right type of instance, and we're also running something like HCMT to make sure it's hitting its correct KPIs. I will say is that, with the correct type of instances that you would have and the new releases that Amazon does, you do have to keep up on because Amazon will release new family types, and sometimes it's better performance and cheaper, right? So it is something that you will continually always do. I think the other one too, I just want to kind of talk about just scalability, for a second as well, right? When we work with customers, we'll usually work backwards on, what type of, we'll call it, SLA uptime that they need. And the architecture kind of drives that, right? So again, if someone needs 99.99, we already know that we're going to be in an HA, architecture. It's going to be multi-zonal, those types of things. So understand the customer's needs specifically around uptime SLAs is like super crucial. I think that's the big thing for me. And the one thing I will say is that Amazon also does very, very good with just built-in monitoring tools, CloudWatch, to be able to get a lot of meaningful KPIs, also with SAP, as well. So I think it's super important. And then before I give it to Nick, like Archana, I know maybe you can kind of touch on this, right? Is that you guys work closely with SAP directly when you guys have a new type of compute or new type of a family instance and it goes through the certifications. You're right there side by side with them, making sure that hey, it gets done, it meets all the KPIs, and then SAP certifies it as well, and then you guys update your documentation, and we're able to start moving production workload on that.
You're exactly right, Eric. In the newer instances, we go through the certification process, for example, for HANA, and then the SAP notes reflects those, the AWS documentations reflects those. And even for newer configurations, there is for example, if it's just a EC2 instance, there is also a specific storage, a specific recommendation that goes in terms of, for example, HANA data volume size, log volume size, etc., in terms of specifically performance focus that we've been talking about, like using GP3s or IO1s or IO2s specifically. So there is a lot of recommendations and best practices out there actually, and we really focus on this area a lot too. But probably Nick, just any perspective from you, Nick?
No, I think both of you covered it pretty well. Just from a RISE perspective, a lot of that, again, as mentioned earlier, it really goes into that assessment planning phase. When it comes to a scalability standpoint, you really want to understand what you're getting from RISE and where you're going with it. And then you always have that opportunity. I mean, obviously, being on AWS, taking advantage of the ability to scale through that RISE environment.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Eric. Let's go to our fifth consideration, business continuity and DR, disaster recovery considerations. So in terms of business continuity, Eric just touched on this. For example, for high availability architectures, and from DR perspective, like the different DR architecture options, like the strategies, the SLAs, the recovery objectives, there are a lot in this specific area actually. And there are also services, for example, from DR, specifically Elastic Disaster Recovery Service like EDRS and various other different services and options available. So this is another important consideration. So Eric, could you please shed some light on this? Yeah.
Yeah, no, this is also one of the ones that we can talk all day on. I think the one thing I will say, I think early on, I want to say Amazon was definitely the leader and what I would say meaningful, really well reliable DR from like a service perspective. I think it used to be Cloud Endor. A long time ago, it was moved into Elastic Disaster Recovery Service. Again, all of our engagement that we have with customers, we are using that service specifically from an application server perspective. We'll certainly set up things like HANA system replication for asynchronous replication if it's across regions, which kind of goes back down to making sure that we're doing proper planning. We always look at a business's RPO, RTO needs, making sure that we're in the proper regions to support the business, and then making sure that we have good, what I would consider DR hygiene, and then DR drills. I think Arsha, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, right? I mean, we do loads and loads of DR tests and loads of bubble DR tests, right? And when I say bubble DR test, I'm really talking about a non-impactful DR test, right? Where it's you're not filling everything over to the region, but you're simulating an outage. And to us, it's super important to do those drills as much as possible. You never know what will end up happening, even if it's just user error that has maybe caused the outage where you've had to recover in a different region. But yeah, I think the ultimate thing is just making sure that we're fully understanding what the customer needs, and then always making sure that we're bringing the right level of resiliency to the infrastructure that we're deploying SAP on, whether that's again from an HA perspective, and then more specifically from a DR perspective, making sure that we have and we've met RPO RTO needs by the business. But just curious more than anything, Archana, have you had a lot of customers? And obviously we know that bubble DRs are pretty normal, but I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you had a lot of customers start doing live DR drills where they're actually failing over to another AWS region, living there for maybe 6 months to a year, and then failing back?
Actually, mostly for the DR, as you know, the secondary region, it's just from DR perspective. But we have seen customers actually stick to the primary region most of the time. But of course, there are the DR drills that goes on where they do the failover and failbacks. But that's not something that I've commonly seen where like for 6 months they use the DR, the secondary as the main primary region. But there are different drills and various different failover failback options that the customers continues to test, make sure that DR strategies are working, like the RTO and RPO perspective, like the recovery objectives are like working in place. So there's a lot, especially from partner space, like specifically making sure like the POCs are set up, like the drills are done to make sure that the system is fully aligned and we can make sure everything is working in place. I hope I answered you, Eric.
Oh no, yeah, for
Because
sure. Yeah, no, just curious. I'm like what you see in the
yes,
field. I mean, so we see that something very similar. We see most again, it mainly runs in the primary region because of the core user base. But I was just
yes,
curious on on have you seen that? We see it every once in a great while, but it's mainly just bubble DR tests. But I think the one thing too is just how easy Amazon does make it to do bubble DRs, right? With doing isolated VPCs, using
Mhm.
SGs for subnets isolation. The one thing too is just also once you're doing these DR drills, being able to start automating what I would consider much faster failover, using like Lambda, those types of things where you can actually, promote and stand up, and take over like HANA being a primary node, automatically starting services, those types of things. So it's not just moving and turning on a VM, it's actually you can invoke action on those VMs to have much faster RPRTO times. And of course, doing those drills. I'd love to hear your thoughts, Nick, on just some of your experience also on the RISE side.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, everything spot on. I would say that even when you're moving into RISE, the coordination, it's very common for us to have certain systems in RISE and certain systems that stay in AWS native, and the coordination between that and still doing bubble tests, absolutely doable. We've done it for many clients where, maybe ECC stays in RISE, maybe they have a BW system or another PO environment within AWS native. We can do a combined bubble test and still make that happen. We have few clients that have entertained the option of running in different regions per year as a DR test. We don't see it too often, but that is an option too, right? Where we fail over a client to the secondary region, and they run there for an entire year, and that basically proves their DR test. But definitely different ways you can tackle that.
Yeah, it's a great point. That's kind of why I was asking, because I know we have a few customers that operate that way. I just know that's not as I would say industry norm for what I would say. Sometimes every customer is a little bit different, right? But it's awesome to hear that perspective also from you, Archana, as well. Again, you have some customers like Nick said that they say, what, we know we're doing bubble tests, but we want to be able to actually prove out that this, to do a couple of bubble drills, hey, we feel like we're comfortable. We're going to do the actual failover and live in that region for a long period of time, and then be able to go back. It does also cement that those DR drills in case something were to happen, right? So.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly, Eric. Right onto it. It all depends upon the customers, the requirement, and the various different things like the strategies and the objectives and the SLAs that we want to reach. But wherever we are, there is like a lot of guidance on the space, and the experience from Pratera and AWS together. Definitely, there's a lot we can do in terms of the high availability architectures and DR strategies. Thank you so much. Let's move on to the next topic. So migration tools and automation. So we've been talking about all the different stages like as we move through, and migration, of course, it's one of the core key steps. So specifically in this area, for example, when it comes to say, be it like homogeneous migration or heterogeneous migration, that like various different options that are available. For example, we can use AWS backup and restore. For HANA, we can do HANA system replications. It's a classical migration, like some DMO. And specifically from migration perspective, there is also the AWS migration service, the AWS application migration service, we call it MGN. Server migration services are available. And apart from it, there are also different AWS services that can be used as tools, for example, to have those, for example, when you have those exports, the files to put it on the S3, storage gateway, data sync, and various different services that can be used as migration tools to help with that whole process of migration. And also just to quickly touch on automation part, just want to give that perspective very quickly. Launch visit for SAP is one of our awesome tool, awesome service that makes it very easy to deploy the SAP applications on AWS, like really quick. So in terms of migration, it can really shorten the time frame. Like everything is completely automated. You can provision the infrastructure all the way up to the software configuration. Everything just in few clicks of the button can be completely automated. So with that having said, I would just like to pass the floor to Eric. Please let us know like what are some of the things that you're seeing with our customers.
Yeah, I mean, you
In
stole
terms
all my thunder. I mean, yeah, those were completely spot on. And I mean, again, those are just what I'd say, the de facto AWS tools. We are very heavy users of AWS Migration Hub for a plethora of reasons. A lot of the centralized tracking and portfolio assessments, those types of things. MGM is something that we use, as you know, Archana. I mean, it's almost an every
Yeah.
engagement typically, right? I mean, you're going to have database systems that you talked about might maybe have to be backup and restore, or using like HSR, Oracle Data Guard, those types of things for asynchronous replication. But MGM is how we do a lot of our lift and shift migrations. It's a tried and true, very very reliable service. Again, minimal downtime, and I want to say just on how many we've done. We've done thousands upon thousands, and it's been a fantastic service for us. And I would say just even getting the agent out when it's agent based replication has been fantastic. Very little impact to customers, very very stable, and again minimal downtime once we actually fell over to the cloud. And you can do some awesome staging as well with that service. You touched on DMO. That's one that gets brought up quite a bit. And then from automation perspective, you're spot on as well. I think for us, this kind of goes back down to the whole story about planning and everything else, but like AWS migration is a core part of that, and then using like the AWS application migration service, looking at dependency analysis, just making sure that you're meeting with application or basis administrators, those types of things. It helps you identify any things that you could potentially be missing, right, from a TCP perspective, right? Maybe you weren't aware that there was a mount, for whatever reason, right? Those services that Amazon have will help you identify some of those crucial dependencies that you would absolutely have to have for migration, right? So, those are all great topics, and I think Nick, I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, absolutely. And all of those are absolutely acceptable ways of migrating that make it super easy to migrate SAP environments when you go cloud native. Something to keep in mind when you go to RISE, there are only certain approved methods to migrate. They're generally migrations using the tool sets that SAP provides, like DMO or tenant copy, those type of migrations. So it's always good to have a partner in there like Proterra to understand, hey, what are the supported ways you can migrate in RISE and get that environment up and running to RISE and SAP standards. So although there are tool sets that do that in cloud native, we always want to be cognizant that moving to RISE requires a certain method to move.
Totally agree, Nick. Thank you. Thanks for that perspective. So let's go to our seventh consideration, SAP on AWS architecture. So all through our conversations, Eric, and we have been chatting about it, specifically in terms of the reference architectures, performance and storage configurations, like the best practices, network design. We have been talking all about that. Anything that you would like to add more on this topic, Eric, for the architecture?
I think the big one is that when we say, again, we talked a lot about this a little bit already, but the one thing I just want to kind of call out here is that, making sure that you're using what I would consider using Amazon's reference architecture as a starting point, because it's there for a reason. It's battle tested. Again, it generally will fit most customers' use cases, and there's many different types of those configurations as well, right? There's HA, non-HA, going, for 4.9s, synchronous, asynchronous, fill. Like there's a lot to look at there. It kind of goes back down to, also identifying, the type of architecture that you need to have in place to support the business needs and goals. The one thing that I just, call out here specifically is just making sure that you're going through a very thorough, what I consider SAP on AWS architecture, but making sure that your landing zones are also aligned to all those core pillars as well. I mean, that's really just it from my side that I just want to call out there. So.
Thank you, Eric. Just quickly, Nick, anything that you would like to talk on this?
I think Eric hit the nail on the head. As far as architecture goes from a RISE standpoint, again, that really does come into that assessment and planning area, right? As you're negotiating the contract, with SAP as you're determining that reference architecture. A lot of that will be predetermined by SAP RISE, but you have the option to pick, do you want HA? Do you want DR? Do you want more than one application server? All that is absolutely free reign. You have the option to pick what you want, but that is all really discussed during that assessment and planning phase.
Exactly. Thank you. So let's move on to the next one, data transfer strategies. Again, when it comes to data transfer networking, this is yet another important consideration, like especially from the egress cost perspective and tied up with the cost. So just on this, I know this is yet another topic we've been talking about, like network and data transfer. Eric, just curious, what are some of the common concerns from customers that we see, like, or what are we doing to address this actually?
Yep. Yeah, it's something that we get tasked with, as you know, right? We have to move, data from one point to the other, and from a customer perspective, they always want to be, moving data via private RC 1918, right? So private traffic, generally speaking, where it is passing firewalls, and I will say usually, 8 out of 10 times it's going to be, direct connect that's going to facilitate that connectivity into AWS, just because of the SLAs and redundancy that you can also have on Direct Connect as well. Speed and scalability is certainly big factors of that. We do have customers that will have, doing transfers, via IPsec or SD-WAN tunnels as well. We've had some customers too that just didn't have the flexibility. They don't have the flexibility of maybe getting an additional circuit or going to their provider and getting a bigger pipe. This is where we can get creative with some of the offline data transfer options that we've had to use before. Like Snowball is a good example, right? Where we've had to take large amounts of data. They were able to hook up a data center versus sending things over the wire, right? So, what's awesome about AWS is that you get multiple options to usually accomplish that mission. And I haven't really seen too many scenarios where we couldn't move data, at all, right? So there's always a path. And any constraint that the customer has, there's usually an alternative path to make sure we get them there, secure, compliant, and efficient. Again, I'd say data sync's another good service where automatically we'll keep things in the sync. Generally speaking, Direct Connect is going to be the de facto. But we are seeing a lot of customers in the field moving to SD-WAN and fully embracing it. And again, that will also facilitate that private RC19 traffic to AWS as well. So.
Perfect. Thank you, Eric. Anything, Nick, from Rise perspective, like you would like to add in here?
Sure. Yeah, I would say, again, with the assessment and planning as discussed, you always want to take that into consideration at the beginning of your project. Keeping your RISE environment as close to, or if not in the same region and availability zone as your cloud native, if you have cloud native, is always going to be key, right? The closer you can keep those, the faster it's going to be, the better speeds you're going to get. Peering can take over, and you have the capability to have that better speed and better communication post migration. So you always want to take that into consideration at the beginning.
Thank you so much, both of you. I think we've been talking about all the great things, and post-migration optimization, continuous optimization is a key. Say, be it like performance or around like all the various different pillars for SAP workloads, basically. Anything specifically that Proterra team, Eric, would you like to add on the space?
Yeah, it's something that we look at. So, we're big believers in, obviously FinOps is a very core part of our mission to making sure that customers have very cost-effective cloud solutions, but also making sure the performance, but part of that is also making sure that FinOps and operations are working together to do those determinations, right? So we're going to have basis involved, cloud ops involved as well. And we're always making sure that, is the system performing as intended, and is the customer happy, being one of the most important parts of our mission. Second part of that is making sure that we're doing the right thing by the business and the customer, specifically making sure that it's cost efficient, right? So we are always making sure that we're looking for ways to save our customers' cloud compute costs. RIs is certainly one of the big topics we can talk forever about, and savings plans is certainly something that we're always looking at for our customers, to give customers the flexibility and cost savings from an SP perspective. Yeah, I'd just say that, we are always continuing looking at it. We have a lot of, tools, things that we've created to always look at, to be able to capture performance issues before they happen, being very proactive in nature there. And I know that, Amazon also has things I kind of mentioned a little bit before about CloudWatch and be able to identify some of those things as well to make it, that makes it very helpful to be able to look at that. But our biggest thing that we've seen is that once you've moved to the cloud, generally speaking, hey, everything's good. We're out of this, what I would consider hypercare period, our very critical period of making sure things stabilize, right? Before we start making financial decisions about savings plans or RIs. But we typically will start doing that post optimization pretty quickly. Once we've got the customer to sign off and they're comfortable with the performance and everything's good, we'll start moving into, that cost savings mode for them to make sure that they're in a best fit performance, family, and then making sure that it's cost effective as well. Usually using some level of savings plans and making sure storage is set correctly too, not using, a large amount of IO, IO3 or something like that, or from a disk type perspective, right? So.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Eric. All great discussions. I think we're almost towards the end. RISE with SAP is another very important topic. Nick is our expert on this. Nick, could you please explain what Protera offers for RISE, specifically with AWS for RISE with SAP?
Yeah, absolutely. So RISE, as we all know, is the wave of the future when it comes to SAP. Everyone's talking about it. A lot of people have started moving to it, but it is fairly new. So it's been out for a few years. A lot of clients are looking at it and just now starting conversations around it and moving. But what we found is that RISE does require a lot of planning when you move an environment from either on-prem or what we would consider cloud native. So even if you already have an environment in AWS today but want to move to RISE, all those are viable options, right? RISE really is a construct of licensing and support and the infrastructure, right, from AWS. So we always want to have those conversations with our clients on how do you move to RISE, what's the best method, and what are you moving to RISE? As mentioned earlier, as you start the conversations, a lot of it revolves around ECC. Do you want to convert it to S4? Maybe you are S4 today. And you might have other products. Let's say you might have BW. Let's say you have POPI. All those are up for conversation when you move to RISE. You have to take into context, are you going to use them going forward? Are you going to decommission them in a certain amount of years? Or are you going to move them maybe to a product that is with BTP, right? That's the other, SAP direction is going BTP. And, as an example, BW, POPI, they all have BTP offerings nowadays. So as we do that, we always want to take into consideration and talk through those environments, right? What makes the most sense to move to RISE? What makes the most sense to stay cloud native? And how do we bridge that? Storage is one thing that comes up quite a bit, right? Shared storage, right? NFS mounts. For SAP, where do you put user SAP trans? For PIPO, where do you put the files that get transferred, right? Those are all common questions that we have that are easier answered in cloud native than they are when you go to RISE. You have to take those into consideration. So all that planning is what we, as Protera, help our clients navigate and get to RISE. And then the support model. SAP does offer support around the RISE environment, right? They kind of take it from a infrastructure and client 000 type of support model. But then the client still has the autonomy and the responsibility of supporting that environment through the database and through any other, I would say, custom clients that a client has, right? So in production, if you have a client 100 or 300, or in quality, if you have multiple clients, 300, 310, 320, something like that, those are on the client to support. So Protera does offer that capability to bridge that gap, help work through that with SAP and the client, really be that liaison for the client to support a RISE environment and support everything cloud native, right? So we understand not only how to run in RISE, but we understand how to run in cloud native, how to support our clients even in the cloud, right? So from an AWS perspective, doing all that cloud support, but also that SAP support that goes along with it. So really a fulsome support model that helps our clients ease that transition into RISE with SAP.
Thank you so much,
Yeah.
Nick. Eric, would you like to add anything here?
He covered everything. Nick's our RISE guy, right? So he stated much more eloquently than I would ever would. So no, I appreciate it, guys.
Thank you, Eric. I think awesome discussion so far. Just to sum it up, AWS provides you with the most choices and proven approaches to SAP on cloud success. And wherever, as we've been discussing, wherever you are in the journey, like say, be it like for the customers to just lift and shift ECC, move to HANA while staying on ECC, or migrating to S4 HANA, or be it on RISE, or innovating and transforming with the various 200 plus native AWS services and BTP services running on AWS. There's a lot we can do together and help customers get more value out of their SAP investments. And about the Protera and AWS partnership, been great partners. One of the first partners to do the first partner actually to do the SAP migration to AWS cloud in 2011, and we have a long-standing partnership since then. Thank you so much. Anything to add, Eric or Nick? Thank you.
No, really appreciate the chat, guys. It was awesome. Looking forward to hopefully doing it again in the future. So really appreciate it, guys.
Same here. Appreciate the
Thank
time.
you so much, everyone.
All right. And thanks, Archana and Eric and Nick, for a really comprehensive discussion there. Covered a ton of ground and a lot of depth. This has been great. And quick reminder to everybody, there is that handout about the half dozen steps to a flawless migration to AWS. So check that out if you haven't grabbed it already. And before we wrap up, we do have one more piece of business, and that is the Amazon gift card prize drawing. And the winner of the $250 Amazon gift card today is Sujay Mudalji from California. So congratulations to Sujay. We'll be in touch to get you your card. And with that, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to thank Protera and AWS for making this event possible. And thanks so much for attending. That's going to conclude today's event. Have a great rest of your day.